So originally, I was going to make a video covering Lavos, but I wanted to get a video out fast, and Lavos would take a ton of time to explain. So instead, I decided to cover things that I forgot in the Limbo video that I either didn't mention or they got drowned out from the audio issues. And yes, I am aware of the audio after the 900 comments complaining, but I can't be bothered to grab the whole video, go into each segment and adjust the audio and post it all over again because I already did that with the Hildren video 3 times. Instead, I'm gonna put a link to that video in the description. Just you're warned ahead of time. The audio is finicky, and you may want the sound up. But hey, I just learned how to use a compressor, so maybe the audio on this one will be slightly better. Anyway, let's get right into it. One of the best things with the Rift is the energy that you get while you're inside it, and we all know that. But you can get crazy with how much energy you pull from this. Okay, so let's say you use the Nuric Energy Siphon and Nourish with Limbo. You can generate a ton of energy with that, not even having to lift a finger. But if you want to lift a finger, not only do you get the Nourish damage buff, but you also get the energy from kills in the Rift multiplied. And hey, if that's not enough, you can even throw in Energize, and then you just never run out of energy ever. Now, most people who run max range on Limbo are mainly doing it for Cataclysm. And yeah, that is a valid ability, but there is one other ability that is begging for a range build, and that is Rift Surge. Rift Surge lets Limbo lock down entire maps, and I am not exaggerating in the slightest. I have had times where I do a mobile defense, and enemies I didn't even think were loaded in yet were already in stasis. Yeah, even in Corpus missions where I expected a nullifier to show up and make me hate my existence more than I already do. And when you have a frame that is the equivalent of a level 100 wizard with time stop and countless spell slots, you pretty much can recreate the scene from Megamind where you just KO on a casual stroll and enemies can't do anything. Okay, this segment kind of got added in while I was getting footage as I realized something about Rift Surge. I was noticing how occasionally it would stop after a certain number of enemies would get locked into the rift, leaving those on the other side of a group not getting pulled in. And it seems like there's some weird spaghetti code where the game designates an enemy as a sort of patient zero for the rift. And when patient zero gets rift surge and exit, they pull enemies in within the rift surge's banish range. Mine sits about at 12 meters. But enemies that weren't patient zero and are given rift surge, it only pulls them back in and doesn't pull in new enemies. This kind of leads to enemies that were directly next to a surged enemy not getting pulled into the rift, despite sending the enemy out of the rift. Really weird. It makes me question how I have been pulling off my map-wide time stops, but I guess just aim at the center of a group or just use Cataclysm, then I don't think it would be an issue. I don't know. I've only noticed this in testing, so it's really weird. Alright, I'm gonna set the record straight on this next point here. I have seen time and time again people claiming that Cataclysm is Limbo's worst ability, even despite the massive range it can achieve and its defensive capability. And I would just like to say to all 9 of you who think that and see this video, on behalf of JoJo fans everywhere, you are so wrong that I can't even make a joke out of it. Cataclysm is Limbo's jumpstart into halting an entire map. You don't believe me? Alright, fine. Let me paint the picture for you. First, start with your Cataclysm and stasis. Enemies inside the Cataclysm won't be able to move and will exit as the Cataclysm shrinks. This makes it a perfect 3 ability combo with Rift Surge, as when enemies are left behind, the Surge triggers and pulls them back in, and other enemies around them are also pulled in. In other words, instead of the shrinking Cataclysm being a bad thing, it turns into the best part of the ability. And before anyone says anything about, oh, that costs so much energy to do that, who cares? Limbo gets so much energy back from cleaning up the enemies and just existing in the rift that he can power an entire continent. You should be modding Limbo for high energy anyway, and I'm about to get into that. Speaking of modding Limbo, here are some of the mods to use with them that I find helpful. For the sake of build variety, I'll skip over ones like continuity or stretch. Let's start with the reason I believe Limbo wants high energy. Quick thinking. With a decent duration, Limbo doesn't need to spam a whole lot, so it's not like he needs that energy just for his ability. But with his passive energy regen, Energize, Energy on Kill, and maybe Zenduric if your Energize isn't maxed out, Limbo can keep his safety net well topped off. He's not unkillable, but as long as I don't run in thinking I'm untouchable, I can survive well into high level content using this in conjunction with adaptation and secondary fortifier. Casting speed, like Natural Talent, Archon Shards, Speed Drift, are also really good since a lot of Limbo's abilities have some hefty casting times, such as Cataclysm and Stasis. If you want to run a more supportive Limbo, my main build consists of using Rift Haven for burst healing, Nourish over Surge so my Rift doesn't spiral out of control while also giving an energy and damage buff, and Bolt Reconstruct. This lets me crowd control, heal, give energy, and play defense, all while being less of a nuisance to the team. Some more niche picks for Helminth options are Silence to make Limbo just straight up untouchable in the Rift, Breach Surge if you want to make Limbo better with crowds and grant stealth multipliers, and Eclipse for a more weapon-focused build with damage reduction. Now for weapons. Of course, a lot of people pointed out in the other video that I use the base Ferox, and that is because I don't have the Tenet yet. And I am too lazy to get it, and hey, I'm a Limbo main. Of course, I can't be bothered to go do something. But there is more at play here than simply using it because it's a magic staff and I like the look of it. Mainly because Limbo has stasis to prevent enemies from moving, landing headshots is super easy, which makes mods like Galvanized Scope, Primary Acuity, and Primary Crux pair very well with Limbo. And mix that with Rift Torrent, and I have been able to hit 6-digit red crits that prop multiple gas procs. And this is just in the Simulacrum with a 20 enemy cap, when I can focus on the damage. Limbo can of course go into the thousands range with his damage multiplier, and now that I actually keep a decent level of strength on him, I am just waiting to hit enough damage to make Rhinos jealous. My personal secondary choice is the Grimoire. I know, I'm really playing up the Dapper Wizard theme. But the Grimoire mainly serves as the utility weapon for me, applying status conditions and stripping defenses. I do also have the mod that increases duration, but I don't notice it that much. I never stop to check and make sure someone isn't moving in time stop. I personally have it modded for corrosive and magnetic, since with the Jahu Cancel and Fortifier on it, it can do a great job at reducing armor and overguard, and its lackluster damage is just balanced out by Limbo's Rift Core. On that note, I would like to say that using anything but Fortifier with Limbo's secondary is a crime. I don't care if you think it's cool to run Enervate because you want more damage. Fortifier solves so many issues for Limbo. Is an Eximus too tanky for your primary? Use your Fortifier. Do you need more survivability? Use your Fortifier. Are you sick of the fact that DE made Overguard bypass stasis? Use Fortifier. In high levels, one alt-fire from the Grimoire tends to strip all the Overguard off multiple Eximus units and puts me at the personal Overguard limit. And even if that isn't enough, Limbo has his own damage buff to ensure it takes it all. And I probably am not even using the best possible build for this. With secondary over with, we come to the melee portion. The Distressa is a solid option, but realistically you can use anything. I would suggest a crit melee over a status melee personally. Limbo does actually have a really cool interaction with melee since Banish knocks enemies down and you can then use stasis to keep them down. This lets Limbo get off round finishers one after the other. Hey, we may be lazy, but we are not above kicking someone while they're down. Now, yeah, this doesn't make Limbo into a melee god on the level of Lurbo or Excal, but it is still something you want to take note of. The Distressa can also help this by having its guaranteed bleed procs on its heavy attack, so even if the initial hit doesn't kill them, they still will go down from the bleed proc. Limbo can also boost the Distressa by using his Rift Torrent, and with a mod like Melee Affliction, since blocking attacks sends enemies flying if they aren't immune, having a heavy attack led into a blocking attack can turn a heavy unit into a ragdoll very fast. And it even pairs well with the Ferox's alt fire to get a full chunk of enemies into it. Just make sure you either have Fortifier or a good chunk of energy for quick thinking, because getting that close as Limbo is never a good idea. And yes, I even have a note on using Operator with Limbo. This should be the shortest segment, but in arbitrations, you of course have those little drones that render a huge chunk of enemies immune to Limbo's rift entirely. Limbo would have to exit the rift just to deal with these. However, this is where we as Limbo mains stop being lazy. Just exit your frame and shoot the thing. You can also use this trick to pick off enemies outside of your rift cataclysm bubble if you don't want to leave the safety of it. With that, I have done my due diligence at passing my knowledge on to you all. As much as I love this top hat wearing cork suit, he does still have his flaws and is far from perfect. Like, still struggling against boss enemies. But, other than assassination, he can still work well in all other game modes. Even defense if you aren't having an aneurysm at the thought of taking your time. Limbo is a frame who works his best when you slow down and think what your next move is instead of pressing 2 buttons and going through the mission. And he can work well with a group if you keep proper management on your rift and stasis. Don't just cast mass area stasis if the mission needs enemies to keep flowing. Don't just spam surge if players are using their guns more than their power. If you keep that in mind, people will be pleasantly surprised with how useful Limbo can be in the right hands. And with that, that is the end of part 2 to the Limbo guide. I will never have to make another one of these again. Unless they announce a rework, then I will be both happy and angry at the same time.